Inclusive design is something, it's a process that ensures the process are accessible by everyone, or we hope that we can enlarge the basis of end users, okay? And take in consideration not just the diversity, that means age, abilities, but important, the status, so which kind of people we are dealing with. So in a certain way, it's a way to design something for equality. And the last time in the previous, let's say, episodes, I would like to highlight that usually when we design for diversity, we naturally improve usability. So even if we take in consideration, I don't know, people with special needs, disability, diversity like kids, elderlies, usually you have a benefits, no, in the usage and the performance in the usage of the products. So, and you improve even the user experience. Okay, so that's the main goal to do that. Of course, this goal should be in generally of industrial design, but not always we can see that for many reasons. So when I talk about status, I think that Alessia said that maybe we're going to do that like repetita iuvant, like we can say in Latin. We should take in consideration the personal factors. I would like to underline that personal factors is something that you can take in consideration to improve your project and to perfect your project. So when you design for a, I don't know specific, but for sure you have decided the kind of target of your product, because usually products are not always distributed worldwide. So there's a sort of reference, no, decided from the beginning. But you have to understand actually what are the habits, the education, you know. For example, the education that kids receive is completely different for people that study university. So they have different level. And they have even different behaviors related to their lifestyle, their tradition. So if you can imagine that even here in Europe, a living room where the family can spend their time during the night, during the weekend, they are very different from country to country. So a living room on the north of Europe is completely different or a living room in Italy, for example. So that when you have this change of mindset, sometimes that can give you some tools or some inspiration during the development of a project. And of course, try to summarize the inclusive design related to product. Of course, we have to take in consideration the adaptability. So we have different abilities from person to person, people to people, and we have different preferences. So try to include the flexibility in your product, give you a lot of opportunity to enlarge the user basis. And of course, especially today, we are talking about not just our product should be easy to use, but especially to understand. So understanding a product, especially when there is some new innovation, there is some new kind of products, let's say typology, for example, you have to understand that you have to minimize the learning curve. And when, by that, we understand, I mean that you have to provide all the details that gives you to the end user or the stakeholders some information on how we can use this kind of tools or products. So when we are doing this sum it up, I can recognize, or I usually say, this is very ambitious, what we are talking about. I mean, it's not easy. Of course, it depends on the subject, of the kind of product, on the complexity of the products, or the complexity of the collection of products. But these ambitions are the fundamental of inclusive design. We talk about frameworks, okay? I don't want to say it again, but universal design, design for all, or other approaches and framework in which we can work inside are very, very similar to each other. Of course, there are differences, and they gives you different benefits and different opportunities. So let's say that all these kind of approaches work in the same direction, the direction of improve the quality of life, improve your autonomy, improve the usage, improve the understanding, and so on. So sometimes, let's say that what we are going to choose one. There is not a correct answer, but I try to give you some, let's say, suggestions. It depends most on the resources that we have. So, for example, if I go upside design for all, for example, requires in the process a lot of time, requires the involvement of a number of users that can represent the diversity. And universal design, for example, you can follow up, let's say, the principle, a sort of checklist. So time, resources, even the complexity of the project, but especially, I usually say that if there's some questions that we don't have the answers. So based on that, you choose the best approach that we can have and we discuss in the last weeks. This is very important because approaches are not like religions, you know, but you put faith in one because I can say there is rules, but for sure there are a lot of references about a specific approach. You have a process to follow. And of course, you can have many methods to do and to develop your project. So answers, questions, data, and even doubts can help you to decide which approach you want to involve in your project. So there is no one is better than another one. There's one that can fit more in your situation, can understand better the requirements, can be a very effective tool during the development of your project. So after that, you said that there is a huge ambition. So we want to make your product usable by many stakeholders and users. But first of all, we have to understand the needs of the diversity of human beings. we have to understand that we are here almost 8 billion of people. And for the first time, for the first time in our history, we are living together with 5 generations. So it's very complex to understand the needs of so many people in so many different situations, living together with different ages and so on. So usually we say that, for example, when we design, taking a huge consideration of disability, but not just disability, you have to ensure that you understand their lives and their needs. Okay? So this is the basis, and the goal is not just to develop your project and make it a better project ever, but even to do something that is enjoyable and meaningful for the users. This is, I can say, the basis even for the product design in general. So understand, here we have for an interesting example. This is a product, medical product. Right now, in this specific typology of products, there is a lot of research trying to understand with many tests and in many ways what are the best way to improve the performance of these products that are even technological, you know. So sometimes I suggest you to see in this direction, not because I'm interested in medical devices, but because they are very good example in this particular period, historical time, that they are looking very deeply in the real needs of people that has special needs. Of course, you have needs and you have diversity. So it's impossible to design for everyone because we have many limits. Usually say we have technological and technical limits. And especially we can take in consideration everyone, because not everyone are interested in a specific product. So try to understand and try to investigate the possible stakeholder, the possible target, the possible type of people. It's very important. When they say we can't design for all, that means, for example, that we have special tools that require an amount of knowledge that not everyone has. You know what I mean? And it's even meaningless to try to design something so specific and that require the knowledge I talked about in an inclusive way. So, for example, you can improve, of course, the performance of specific tools, but you do not need to enlarge the vision in an inclusive way. For example, for a mechanical tool, you know, that are called for a typical kind of worker. Let's say that right now in my studio I have the central room of the station of the nuclear, let's say, central nuclear, like the one that exploded in Russia many years ago. This is a very complex room where very complex tools. It's impossible to design this kind of devices and spaces for diversity, because the inhabitants, the user, the end user of these spaces are very specific. So usually when we talk about diversity and we talk inclusive design, most people intend disabilities. And this is partial right. The main target is the elderly people. It's the part of the population that is increasing so much. And this is a good, this is very good. So we work a lot to do that, to improve the quality of our life, the research, technology, medicine, and so on. So the perspective of our lives right now is about 85 years old minimum. So right now, even in Italy, we have people that can survive even to 19 years old and so on. So we can live with disability and with illness, let's say, in a better way right now. So usually I try to intend, I don't want to be cynic, but elderly people are my scapegoat. So if I can design and understand better the needs, the behavior, and the limits even of elderly people, we can develop a good product. Of course, during the process, we have to understand even and try to address the potential obstacle when we are utilizing and using a tool, a product, or a collection of products. So here we have an example, interesting example of a toothbrush. Then it's switchable, and you can change different, like handles, let's say that can meet your expectation and meet your needs. So people have limits using small objects. We have, when you have a certain age, you don't have the precision to use small and refine small and thin objects, for example. So right now, there's a very interesting development. Right now, I think they are just prototypes, but you have a very huge collection that can recognize and are made especially for this kind of needs. When we identify, even we are going to understand that if you want to understand the needs, there is some techniques, processes, methods. Can be workshop, can be different activities, interviews if you want. I'm not actually a special fan of interviews because we only have a question, just your focus on a specific answer. Sometimes you can miss some details. You can use surveys, of course. And so there is many strategies that you can use to do that. And especially you have latent needs. Try to imagine that when you are going to involve end user and stakeholder, or when you have the possibility at least to do that, not everybody has the same specific and technical language to express their needs. So these kind of activities, let's say that, they are supposed to be designed. Okay, there has to be designed to try to understand what actually people can't express naturally. So what I mean that it's that through activities that can be put images on a table, use keywords, or like so using even some sort of toys or prototypes or whatever, and observe the the behavior, making some question, give the opportunity to talk in different ways, give us to the designers, to the developer of the project, the opportunity to uncover some needs that they have very, very difficult to be expressed. So this kind of methods and this kind of techniques even can be used even for testing or usability, of course. And you can use like a persona creation, the typical user, but it usually is quite incorrect. But give insights for different kinds are very, very relevant and important during the process. And of course, take case studies and even on successful needs identification can be very, very helpful. So there is no, let's say, manuals or books or checklist that actually gives you the opportunity to follow a simple path to understand what we are doing related to the needs and the ambition of people of many, many, with many, many differences. So when we talk about, let's say, approaches, design approaches, inclusive design approaches, there is a lot of processes. You can look online, and you can dig on the web. You can find many, many images that can represent the process to develop something very, very inclusive. For example, user-centered design start from an idea or research, the typical, let's say, product development. And in this process, you have, let's say, the part where you have a lot of tests, no? So the aim, the ambition, and the goal of a process is to reduce the errors, especially when we are talking. This is even related to my profession. When you are developing a product that requires molds, molds can be very, very expensive. So be certain that you are developing something that is almost, let's say, perfect for what we understand in this condition, in a particular condition, can be very, very helpful. So reduce the error, for example, can be summarized in this scheme. So from the point one, you have the classical design test. Then you have the user center we said before. Then we have the participatory design, okay? And I would like to add and address some attention to the design for empowerment. So in design for all or in co-design, there is an exchange of information, not just related to ambition and needs or special needs or whatever, but even knowledge, no? Related to developing of a project, related to some aspect of details or whatever. At the end of this process, we empower our skills and we empower our knowledge. That's something that I can testify to you that happens, and usually happens when you design specific activities that can, with user and stakeholder, to make the needs emerge correctly. So the number 4, it's one of the most expensive process. And on expensive, I don't mean especially talking about investment, money investment. it requires a lot of time, a lot of energy. So when you analyze with users your project, your idea, your concept, you design with users or stakeholders, and you prototype with them, you are of course reducing the errors, but even you are giving the opportunity to test your project in every steps. So when you have time, you have the budget, you have the resources, you have the knowledge, you can address your process to number 3 and number 4. But like I said before, it depends even on the complexity of the project. The first obstacles, based on our experience, during the development of a product, or even when you see a product, so the result of development, is the comprehension of a product. So you have different sensory aspects they are involved: tactile, visual, functional, chromatic, acoustic, thermal. Nobody taking consideration the olfact even of a product, so the smell of something. Take in mind that kids, when they have a couple of years, they usually put something in their mouth and they smell it to understand exactly if they want to use. In some sort of population, they still do that in a certain way. Let's say that. So understand the product or the tool or a collection. I think this is the part I want to focus most part of this presentation and this class. Because if you do a good job taking consideration this, you not just enlarge the user basis, but you provide, let's say, a joy and let's say in a usage of something that gives you even the opportunity to do something very complex, and people they usually normally. So there is a relationship, a huge relationship between the understand how I enjoy to use something and the action that are required to do something. Even for people, there are some limits. So the pleasantness, of course, we have a lot of teachers here, professor, is always a goal, but especially for inclusive design. If we talk about some tools, some aids, some related to illness or to wellness, they are not developed to be pleasant. There is many reasons, but I don't want to deal with that in this part. So pleasantness is not just the beauty. Pleasantness is something they can avoid your judgment. I mean, you, of course, when you choose a product, you choose because you like it, you don't because you like it, and you don't like it, and you need it. But recognize that the design of a product have some, let's say, refinement, attention to the aesthetics and to the details, the choosing the materials, if the material is expensive, if the material is cheap, in a way they use it, is something that normally user and stakeholder can recognize. Even let's say not directly, but in a subconscious way. So there is the physical characteristics and the way these characteristics are, in a way they are perceived, okay? And it depends on the subject, of course. But there is always an emotional connection about that. And especially, based on my experience, related to something that's supposed to be inclusive, and take in consideration limits of people or special needs. So this was my master. It's not between us anymore, but pleasantness is something that is very relevant and connected to economics as well, because it's part of our civilization, no? The overcoming of basic needs is something that can be even a requirement of developing a project. So, taking in consideration this, it's very, very important. When when we talk about the understanding of products, I suggest you to use familiar elements, something that is related to tradition, something is connected to a common ground. So something that is familiar helps you to do something even new. So there is some characteristics, some let's say innovation, special function that maybe can be even hidden or let's say ghosted in a familiar object. That gives you the opportunity to the user to discover the object and start the interaction in a different world, in a different mood. So the intuitive way in which we can develop a product, it's gives you the opportunity to do something that we discussed with the Professor Mincolelli. I explain myself. The gentle innovation that we are talking about. So gives the opportunity to the user to do something very intuitive, gives the work on the user satisfaction, and of course in accessibility. So inclusive and accessibility in this particular way are not just related to people with disability. We have a lot of work to do in this kind of products. I usually say that they are magic boxes. You have something that doesn't express not just the function, but only the brand. So you recognize from this that it's something technological, but actually it doesn't represent what actually can do, what are the opportunity. And if it doesn't express the opportunity, how can be attractive to a part of population that have, let's say, 70, 80, or 90 years old? Because I can give you a simple example. My father-in-law has 4 or 5 remote control on the couch. I try to command different kind of smart TV devices. When it comes to my home, it has just one remote control. I can do everything. So it's very simple. I can understand simple, but the simplicity, no, sorry, it's just this box that do that. Yes, it's just this box. So when we have this kind of devices, and I think that product design right now is merging a lot with technology. Our lives, our behaviors are very connected to mobile devices. This kind of product, they have, I mean, let's say a Vulnus. They have a huge gap in understand exactly what they do. So even the famous Alexa, they have 4 buttons. For me, if I am a sort of expert user, I don't actually recognize the meaning of this button. So plus, minus to do that, volume maybe, and the other buttons for what? So it's very complex. If you think that you have part of population, they don't have the knowledge, they have cognitive disability, they have a lot of limits based on their lives, the tradition or whatever, to make understand this kind of products. So even if we take, for example, this, let's say that in the previous version there was even it was written TV. So just gives you a clue of what happened. Right now there's nothing inside. The new version, there's nothing inside. But it's not true that these kind of products are very common for everyone. So comprehension, of course, are based on the main aspect is the visual sensation. So the vision represents the 70%, let's say that, of our perception. So it's important to understand that our eyes are very, very important. And people who have the, let's say, a good visual acuity, or even if they don't have, they have a huge deficit. Of course, there is a lot of tools, there are a lot of devices, and maybe we have the chance to talk about that. But vision is the first approach, no? The first moment when we were dealing with a product. And you recognize by, for example, of course, from its shapes, but you have even to understand the depth of perception. So when you have to put this kind of products, the volume, no? So if there is some references, no? And the meanings, of course, related to the shapes, no? So the expression of a product helps a lot to understand